So my name is Lori Rand. I should introduce myself. I am a certified passive house designer and builder here in Halifax. And I am the owner of a company called Habit Studio, and we design passive houses, and we're working on our first passive house retrofit. Before we really dive in today, I want to take a minute to recognize that Passive House Canada acknowledges the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Métis, Inuit, and First Nations people that call this land our home. And I'll just do a quick rundown of what we're going to do today before we get started. So our event sponsor SIGA, or rather Hans, with our sponsor SIGA, will say a few words, followed by our guest speaker Kim Walton, who's going to be talking to us about passive house specifications. And then at the end, we will open up the floor to Q&A. We'd love to hear anything you want to follow up with Kim about, and we'd love to hear also just generally things that you're working on, passive house projects, anything at all in the realm of passive house that you'd like to talk about. So before we start as well, I just want to let you know that the annual Passive House Canada conference is going to be held May 25th to 27th in Victoria, BC. And there is an option to attend online. So it's a hybrid conference with lots of good content. So I encourage you to sign up. The theme of the conference is In the Face of Climate Change. And the goal is to bring together like-minded individuals to incite conversations about how we can work together to create sustainable, future-focused buildings and communities. So tickets are on sale now, and we'll put a link in the chat for that. The other announcement that we need to make is that we are having a live in-person certified passive house designer / consultant training here in Nova Scotia. And that is going to be in June, so June 3rd and 4th, and then the 10th and 11th. So that's 4 full days, and it will be, it's held in Dartmouth in the HRM. So we'll put a link to that in the chat as well. So hopefully anybody here wants to join that, you'll sign up and share the word with your colleagues, because we really want to start having more live events, getting to see each other in 3 dimensions. So without further ado, I want to thank our sponsor SIGA for this event. SIGA is a manufacturer, developer, and distributor of air and wind type products for building construction. They strive for a world of zero energy loss buildings. And I'm going to pass things over right now to Hans Eich, who is the manufacturer representative for SIGA, and he's going to introduce himself and say a few words.
Yeah, hey everybody. I hope you can hear me, because I can't hear myself. Yeah, thanks for having me. Usually my colleague Sean would be here, but he couldn't join today, and so it's pretty exciting to be part of this event. I actually met Lori in the past, and maybe some of you know my Passive House Explained video that I made way back when. So today I work for SIGA, and we're a manufacturer of high performance tapes and membranes. We work very closely with builders, architects, and engineers in over 40 countries, and we help you achieve your air tightness goals. And how do we do that? Of course, with fine products such as Wiglove, Reson, and Fentrim, and the other ones that are all available, but also with our know-how. We do lunch and learns, site training, and workshops. I'll leave my contact down in the chat here, so if you want to reach out, please do so. And thanks for your attention. And now back to Lori.
Thank you. It's nice to have you here. Sean is always nice to have, but it's nice to meet a new face. So moving ahead, we're going to have our our special guest, Kim Walton, talk. And I think probably with a little bit of support with Kelly and I, but we'll turn it over to Kim. So Kim is a certified passive house designer and builder, and she is the founder of Bow Crow Design. And the presentation today is about how to master passive house specifications. And, you know, we don't really have Kim's bio up here, but Kim is a longtime experienced passive house designer. She and I work closely together. We've been on the board of Passive Buildings Canada together for a number of years, and Kim is currently our president. And she's also, I think you're the treasurer, if I'm not mistaken, of Passive Buildings Alberta. So
it's true.
She's got her fingers in a lot of pies. So thank you so much for being here today. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
I think you say that as lots of fies.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to see if I'm managing this well. So I'm going to share my screen, and I think this is the one I want right here. See how this goes. Is that looking right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. So I'm going on to the first slide. So here I am. I am practicing from the foothills of Alberta. So I am in Alberta, and I've been working on sustainable, better insulated buildings for about 40 years, and I am a certified passive house designer and builder, and have a couple of certified buildings under my belt. Today, we're going to talk about finding things, specifications, writing specifications, and finding passive house materials. Start a little bit to talk about strategies, about how to work with teams a little bit. In order to have a successful passive house project, you can't progress with the project or construction project in a normal way. So the way that buildings are currently built and planned, the strategy or the way that people work is pretty siloed. People do the part of the job or the scope of work that they understand is their part of the job, and pass it off to the next person, or the amount of coordination that happens between one discipline and another is limited, and might be in by just passing on drawings or passing on notes or an email or two. Everybody's time challenged, everybody's overcommitted. But in order to do these projects properly, everybody needs to get together. You need to talk about specific things, and everybody needs to understand the direction that the building's going and what the decision-making process is, including people who are writing specifications. It's important. You can't just make some decisions at the end of the project or just when you're ready to order things and throw it, or have plans issued for pricing and throw it at somebody to find us these materials, do the specifications. It doesn't work that way. So a couple of terms that you may or may not have heard of before, but one of them is integrated project delivery. Integrated project delivery is a process for delivering projects, and there is a contract, a CCDC contract, that is specifically about and lays out the ways that integrated project delivery can be done. That's usually focused on bigger buildings and bigger projects. That kind of delivery and project delivery is one that I feel is needed for any passive house projects, big or small. Smaller projects often do this kind of work anyway. When you have a crew of people who've always worked together, they do speak and they do share information and come up with strategies and for looking at the building as a whole. But integrated project delivery and a contract that talks about that and works towards that really makes a big difference in the end product being successful, and also in making sure that it becomes in under budget instead of over budget, because you're not doing things on the fly. So the big deal here is alternative design processes. And this is kind of the process. So an initial meeting before any design work, before any proposals are made, ideally the team meets, and that means everybody meets. That's the client and the architect, but not just the client and architect, that's the engineers, all of the engineers, structural, mechanical especially, and electrical. Mechanical especially because Passive House, although it's light on mechanical, supposedly, the mechanical parts of the building are very important and an important part of how the whole building is designed, and accommodating mechanicals is a very important part of it. The Passive House consultant absolutely needs to be brought on at the very beginning, the specifier and the general contractor. So objectives are established for the location and the client's needs. And as the design is developed, more input from the BOG, the boots on the ground partners, is really important too. So a lot of meetings and a lot of discussions doesn't necessarily talk about the best way forward for working out rebar layout, or how rebar works with insulation, or whether some mechanicals that we had specified or need or wanted aren't even available anymore, which has happened a lot during COVID, and how to install something, techniques for installing change over time, how to frame something. Some experienced framers may have better ideas of how to do something and better approaches. All of these things make a big difference in the decisions that are made and for the materials that are ordered. So the technical aspects need to influence the design. That's a lot of words for not very many, that just one picture, hey? So this is something that you have to get in your head when you're thinking about Passive House, that this is a whole building process. 1 + 1 almost never adds up to 2. 2 + 2 sometimes is 1. Unless things are modeled, unless the energy modeler and the Passive House consultant is on top of all of the decision making all of the time, then problems can arise pretty quickly, and you can be well into a design where things are just going sideways, and there's some decisions that have been made that will destroy or destroy the possibility of a building becoming certified, if that's the goal. So inexperienced teams might imagine that all that's needed for a Passive House certification is to add more insulation. Not true. And European windows and tape, and that ends the design process. And it's true, some of those things are used, and sometimes that's what we want. But the reality is that the design of the building has to be integrated. It's an integrated process. The Passive House consultant will make the initial suggestions for the success of the project, and will work with the team as well as the certifier in helping to guide design decision making. So the active use of the PHBP or energy modeling process and software will let the team know if the project is on track for certification, and in the end, the specification of the materials will be key to the success of the build. So if something's not available, or we can't get something in Canada, then that's a big deal, and that's going to assist the Passive House consultant in the submittals, because in the end, if the project is being certified, there's an awful lot of submittals and things that need to be, you need to know what the performance values are, and that is an important part of the certification process. This little markup on the slide just from a specification from a project, just to make a note that related sections is a guideline, but it would be better stated as closely related sections, and keeping in mind that all sections are related. One thing always is going to affect something else that isn't specifically attached to, but it may, so something that is in the building envelopes very likely to affect the mechanical system, for instance. So all sections are related. So specifications are what makes the puzzle pieces fit, and including the specifier at the outset of the project and concurrently with the design ensures the correct and available products are used in the drawings. That's a very important part of the whole planning process. Okay, so what's up with the weird passive house terminology and unfamiliar products? And this is where specifications for this kind of work really become difficult without experience and without knowing. So, I mean, what the heck is hygiene? And what is a glass G value? And what is thermal bridging? And how do you actually account for it? And I'm just going to go back one. So we want a couple. We want to be the blue building. That's the idea. This is about thermal bridging. This whole photo is showing a block of buildings that are just not performing very well, but the blue building's doing really well. That's what thermal bridging is all about. But how do you get it? And you can't just specify no thermal bridging. That doesn't happen. But how some of the materials that get you there are the important part. Why does one tape matter over another tape, and what is a lambda value? So some of those things are very difficult to explain. I'm not going to explain them all well in this conversation, but there are resources, and at the Passive House Institute, there is something called Passipedia, and that's where you can hunt and look for some of these terminologies so that you can better and quickly understand what they all mean. So just because I brought up some of those terminologies, I think hygiene is the most kind of weird one in the English language, because we think of hygiene as something completely different than what this is. So it's not about washing your hands. It's not about cleaning things, but it's about condensation, and it is a very important part of considering using the right products so that we are not creating conditions that would promote mold or mold growth. The G value has a different name in North America. We call it a solar heat gain coefficient, but it really has talking about the films that are on the glass and how the glass performs in the building. What is thermal bridging? I think I gave you a little example in an image, but this is the technical example. And if you really want to know what the formula is, there it is on the screen for you. And why does the tape matter? It really matters because some of it's permeable, some of it's not permeable, some of it has an acrylic backing, and sometimes a tape matters much more in one location than another, and one type of tape in another. And that's what you depend on the energy consultant and the experienced team members to let you know as a specifier. And the lambda value is the heat conductivity of a material is known as a lambda value. And it's so important to know what the lambda value is if you're doing energy modeling. And it's also going to be important to know when you're specifying some materials, because it's going to be part of the whole assembly and part of how we certify a building. So when Lori and Kelly and I started talking about this, the first thing that came out of, I think it was Kelly's mouth, was what? And what is this? And what? And that's really the big deal. So if you're thrown into a project and you need to find materials, how do you find these materials, and what does all of this mean? So the easiest thing to do is to go to the Passive House Institute page, and there is a component database, which is really pretty easy to use. And there you can find components that are certified, and it's the best place to start, even if, and I'll show you, I'll talk about this later, but it's not everything is certified, but this is the best place to start at the 5-component database. And you can find, I've just selected some components of a building, and these have to do with keeping cladding away from the building and doing some of the thermal bridge free construction. And I was looking in this search for some things that are available in Canada. So that is completely possible to sort for things that are available in Canada. And then you can also search for the climate zone that you're looking for. So the climate zone where you are, or in Nova Scotia, is cool and temperate, and where I am, it's cold. So you can sort based on those things as well. And then you can find these products. This isn't always the case. You might not be able to find something you're looking for that fits everything that you're, the climate zone and the location, but this is a good starting point. And then this is the kind of information that you get when you click on a product. So it's giving you the component ID and the manufacturer and the quality, all of those things. These are important parts of specifications for certification. So that's why you want to find this information. When you click on the certificate on this site, then that gives you this certificate, and this is what you want to hold dear in a file. The certificate gives you all of the information that is actually needed to when you do a compliance or when you're doing certification. It'd be part of the folder or part of the information that's provided. But what might happen is that you may not be able to find something that's a certified product, but something that's close. And what you want to do is prove that this product is going to work in your climate, and in that case, if it's not certified, this is the information that you're looking for from the product and from the manufacturer in order to have it part of the certified building. So more about finding products. So every product is not certifiable or certified. These are some of the examples of the products that require detailed information when you're going for certification for Passive House. And this is a long list. This is just a partial list. We also, but these are some of the things that we need to find the performance for. And you may be using a quarter of them may be certified when you're doing the application, just because you can't get the product, or it's not made in North America, or all kinds of reasons, and one of them being budget, of course, too. So for uncertified products, third-party testing is required for energy efficiency and for the performance, that they're climate appropriate, that for the thermal resistance and the permeability. The information that the certified products provide is a reference for acceptable alternatives, and this is the information that's needed by the energy advisor for modeling. So this is where the certifier works with, and the energy advisor is leaning on the certifier or the specifier to help find these products. So, so this is an example of a ventilation unit that's not available in Canada, and the certification will require the same information that's laid out in this particular certificate. So, so this might be an ideal ventilation unit. Can't get it in North America, but can we get something that's similar? The hunt is on. So I've got this list of places to find some certified products, and we can put the links for this in the chat. But these are good places to start to search for products that work for certified buildings. So some of the other strategies, as anybody who's working on the project, this is advice for having a successful project. And so a physical mock-up is such a good idea. This is a great mock-up. That's why I took this photo showing all of the layers, because anybody on the team can see this mock-up and understand how everything is affecting everything else for this window installation. It's a really helpful visual for everybody on the team.
Kim, can I interrupt you?
Yes.
Harvey is asking in the chat if you would share this presentation after, and we didn't talk about that before, so putting you on the spot here, but can we do that?
Don't we always share these things? Yes, absolutely.
I don't know.
Yes,
Okay,
I have no reason not to share it. Absolutely.
Super.
Okay. So this is a drawing, which is as good as the mock-up. Well, maybe not as good as the mock-up, but having a drawing like this is a very simple drawing of the building assemblies, and with the of the control layers throughout the building wall section, and that is a really helpful for all the team members, top to bottom, to understand what the strategies are in each one of these wall assemblies. So this is not applied necessarily to one section or any of those things. It's just a big drawing with big letters, with nice colors, and easy to identify the different layers. This also, same approach. I've just included this one because it's one from a project of mine. And the reason I included it was because this was what we used as for that same strategy. We used this with the engineer and with the detail, the architect, and with all the details that we developed for the project. And it was used as guideline for on-site construction. And it changed. So this would just get reissued with the changes, just a strikeout through the part that changed. And that this simple, it's part of the drawing set, but it wasn't really part of the drawing set. This was issued before we had the construction drawings. This is just the guideline, and it helps so much to have something so simple that we can just keep turning to understand the direction of the project. So here's some notes. I'm going to read them out to you. In Division 1 specifications, include a clear description of passive house requirements for certification. Any special concerns for the project included in these. Roles are clearly identified for the project. So who's responsible for what tasks? And every team member is responsible for checking and confirming other people's specifications and work and with other sections of work. So important. Training requirements for site and the CM team are listed, and opportunities for site training and trades training. So understand that everybody that's going to be involved in a PH project doesn't know about PH. They haven't been trained in it. They don't know. Everybody who knows or even knows a little bit is a mentor. It's how we're going to help everybody to understand how to build better. Specific air tightness strategies and testing protocols need to be specified, when they're going to happen, and maybe even a flow chart of what if this happens, then what do we do next? So if there's a failure in a door blower test, what would the next step be? And if we have success in the door blower test, what the next step would be. Include a commissioning plan, the thermal bridge strategy, which can be demonstrated through simple drawings so that everybody understands it, a documentation of who's responsible. And there should be a Division 1 spec for responsibility specific to passive house. So remember, there is responsibility for everybody, but everybody's responsible for everybody else. Okay, so particularly important specifications is when you're writing out specifications is 07 is the thermal and the ceiling air sections, and the windows, doors, and glazing, and the mechanical and electrical. So all of the sections are relevant sections coordinated for accuracy and the project specifications. So that part is a question, I guess, and that is something that we just need to be sure that it's checked. And each relevant section for passive house should have a statement for passive house requirements. And the hierarchy of performance values are stated. So how this is the hierarchy and how they these components fit in this hierarchy. And ensure the compatibility of materials. So this is a tricky one and sticky one. Do different adhesives and tapes and membranes actually stick to each other, and for how long? That's a pretty important one, and it's one that might surprise you. And what's the life expectancy of the air sealing strategy? So certain tapes don't last very long, and some materials don't last forever. Some materials we thought lasted forever don't last forever, and when you tear buildings apart, you find that out. So the right product for the right place. So does everybody understand the PH requirements, and have all the consultants coordinated which disciplines? This just reminds me of a story of a project I was working on. So mechanical was done, and it was handed off to somebody who was doing the mechanical drawings. And there were some issues with the way that things were put into the drawings. There were a couple of mistakes or things that we needed to change just for compliance for PH. And when I was talking to it was up to me to talk to the person who was doing the drawings and help them to try and understand why we wanted to make these, to him, weird changes, because he didn't understand passive house at all, didn't really understand what the goals were. And so we did get through that. He became pretty interested in what we were doing. Then I just pushed a little bit more and said, maybe you should take a course. Maybe you'd like to know more. Would you like me to give you some references? And he backed off. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. But he was pretty interested, and it wasn't that it was difficult to get him to make some changes. They weren't too weird, but there is some tendency for people to just think, well, whoa, that's way too much for me. That's too much information. I don't need to know it. But the more we ask, the more we nudge, I think the better people will understand what the goals are, the end goals are. Consistent and regular coordination meetings, super important. You can't say that more, can't say this enough, that regular meetings may seem like it's a waste of time, or we don't need to do this, but it always something comes out at regular meetings. And if the meetings are short, that's not a problem. But if often they end up being longer because we end up talking about things that we didn't know were an issue, or that we didn't know we didn't understand. And does the builder know that about the pH requirements, and have they undertaken pH training? And that's pretty important. And if they haven't, then the people who are on the team do need to understand that and help make sure that is being done during the project as well. Okay, so I asked for some lessons learned from a couple of people. And so I'm going to read this story out loud from Sandra Lester. What she said is, what comes to mind are the windows at a Humber River Hospital. It was a P3 DBFM project, so we had to be careful. And the contractor would try and put in the cheapest thing possible. And we chose a performance-based specification instead of a product-based specification. It's a good approach, and energy efficiency was important, so that the interior surface of the windows was warm enough. That's good hygiene. And that would provide thermal comfort to a patient sitting in the room. Infection control was important. Again, good hygiene. Low maintenance and durability was important. And daylight and glare was important as well. We specified enough performance requirements for the specifications to ensure that HRH would get either triple glazed, low argon filled with warm edge spacers, and the daylight and glare control performance requirements would either be fulfilled with interstitial blinds or automatic photochromatic tinted glazing. And we got the latter. It ended up being a much more high performance building than the LEED silver building that they had initially wanted. So, so sometimes as a specifier, this is a great lesson. You can have more influence than you ever knew just by specifying things in the right way. So Kelly Fisher's, just be clear, concise, and coordinated. And that's a clear, concise, and coordinated statement, which goes a long, long ways. And thank you. So I'll put up the links for those products links and ready to answer questions. Going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Kim. There was a question in the chat. Well, I think the rules for this Q&A are feel free to unmute yourself and just pop in, but we'll start with Harvey's question, which is a really important one. And he asked it kind of way back, 20 minutes ago, but, where do certified tradespeople come into the strategy of and I think when he asked that, it was when you were talking about IPD and the team. And I think it's so important that we, like we talk about the team that includes the builders. Like if all of the architects and engineers are all on the same page, but we forget to include the builders, it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, so they need to be brought in early for sure, and during the planning process. And do you have weekly meetings with everybody there? And that may be true. You may for a period of time have that. It seems onerous, but it's an important part of it. I think providing lunch and making it more of a conversation than just presentation, and that makes a big difference. But the reason that I say that bringing a lot of people in seems like it's onerous, but the reason that it's important is that you always will find something that's key to making everything easier. for everybody else, the integrated part of the process, right? So I hate it when the plumber comes in and drills a hole through such and such, and I have to patch it. You know, if we could just do the holes in this certain way, and that just and money for two of the trades. You know, those kinds of comments go a long way. The idea between integrated project delivery is that you're saving money in the end. Lots of pre-planning so that you're saving money in the end and everybody knows their path forward. Don't need to be meeting with everybody the whole project, but early on it's most important. What that looks like is set up by whoever is the coordinator for the whole system, but it's all written up into a contract beforehand. That's all part of the contract, and it's spelled out how that process will look and how everybody's compensated, and everyone's compensated fairly for their input and for the time that they spend in the pre-planning process. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I think, I mean, Harvey, do you have a follow-up to that, or did that cover it?
I never ever like to contradict Kim, so I'm very careful what I say. I think, you know, I think that what you're saying is really accurate. I think a couple things that you added in there, which Hans could talk to a lot more than me, is really about the mock-ups. I think that even if you're not a tradesperson, I'm a certified tradesperson, but if I wasn't a certified tradesperson and someone had walked me through a mock-up, I think that goes a long way. And I think really, irrespective of all the documentation and all the books that you have on the site, I think it really just boils down to really the effective communication. Because from the tradesman's point of view, tradesperson's point of view, the main thing I think is really the air barrier issue. And then on top of that, just becomes the air boss. But it's the communication of making sure that, as what you were talking about, each layer adds on to the next layer. So if you don't understand thermal bridging, if you don't understand adding extra insulation at a certain point, that doesn't solve a lot of things. So it's really that understanding is number one as a tradesperson, so it can be communicated, or somebody's coming onto the site to tell everybody that this is the reason why we're doing it. And I think it's kind of a catch-22. Either you know it or you don't, or you want to understand it, or you just want to be there and get your job done. So some people may look at it and say, okay, fine, for Hans, this is perfect for him. What are the 3 strategies to seal my window with an air barrier, right? What are the 3 ways SIGA recommends you do it? And that's all someone really cares about. And then you may find somebody else who really wants to get into the nuts and bolts, but it still boils down to coming back to the mock-up, because then you can hit on everyone who's on site of what's important to them. And that's what I think. And I didn't really, as I said at the beginning, I don't like to contradict Kim, so I hope I'm adding and not contradicting.
Well, no, all of what you said is great. I think the only thing I'd add to that is that having meetings with food is a good idea, just because food makes everybody listen a bit better. You know, they're not being
forced. That's the hygienic part. That's not the hygienic part, is it?
Yeah, I think you have to wash your hands first, but it does make a difference. It makes it more collegial, makes people feel like they're ready to talk. People like to talk over food, and they're not missing, you know, it's not they're being forced to listen and being told what to do. It's about coming together and talking about things. Cookies work too.
The only problem is it depends on the client. Like, I guess the other side is, which is interesting, and it's just, and I don't say this in jest, but the numbers are changing, as we all know. So as building codes change and they move towards the passive house standard, the pricing is increasing. But if somebody now today is going off and doing a passive house, they're obviously spending a lot more money than if they were doing a conventional or borrowing somebody else's.
It depends. Yeah, it depends on the project, Harvey. So there's been many projects delivered for under standard cost because they've, number one, used an integrated project delivery method. That is the way to do it. And then really being careful about what the purchases and materials that are used in the project and their strategies. So streamlining the strategies is important. So there's a lot of more expenses up front in the planning part of it, and a lot less of head scratching and time spent doing and redoing things on site later on and picking the wrong materials at the last minute.
Yeah, I guess what the point what I'm making is that there is a perception, and in some cases it is actual that passive house is more expensive. Let's assume that's the case. It may not
Yeah.
be, but it's the case.
Yeah,
So
it's not
normally, if you
always.
have a client who feels comfortable to go that route, then they'll pay for the food to come on site to help. That'll lower their costs later. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah,
So if
I
you
did.
have
I just did a presentation yesterday where that's all I talked about was that the owner and the client have to be on board. Like they just have to be on board for this to be successful. If they're always bucking what's going on site and they're the ones who are worried about the bottom line, it's not going to happen. The project's not going to be successful.
Yeah. So this is a great discussion. It's so funny. It just occurred to me that, you know, not so much like you're right, Harvey, that the cost of everything is going up right now. And I just kind of was thinking, but honestly, I think the thing that's making things expensive is that we're all in such a huge hurry because there's so much pressure to get so much stuff done right now that I think things are slipping through the cracks more so than, you know, that they just have to cost more. So Hans, I think you should come out and ask your questions. You had a good question.
So I actually have, this is really interesting conversation because I actually have two different scenarios right now with projects. And they don't, one of them don't involve me, but one of is a single family residence. They have specified a specific membrane which they're using, but the tradesperson doesn't care enough to install it properly. And so the homeowners in constant fight with that tradesperson to actually get them to pay attention. They're a roofing company and there's a membrane underneath it. And I think what happened is that they just they said, yeah, we'll install that. And they usually install a different membrane. Now they're installing a Sega membrane, and they're just not happy and not paying attention to it. They just kind of, you know, threw that in. And so that's really biting the customer. And I do have another project example that I wanted to ask about. Maybe they're both in the same scenario. The other one is a vapor permeable membrane was specified. This is now we're talking about, I don't know, so it's pretty large development. I would guess that it's, what's an 8-story building, probably 100 units-ish. The facade installer had priced out a vapor closed material, underbid others, won the contract, and then afterwards the architect realized, oh, hold on a second, he was going to install the wrong material. Now their cost is cut. They've underbid everybody. The others aren't happy because they didn't get the business. He's not happy because he's also losing money. So everybody's unhappy. And I think those are sort of both in the same realm. I don't know how to avoid these things, but I do see them very regularly.
Well, the way to avoid the second one is not to take the lowest bidder. Like whoever made that decision is the one who's at fault. So
yeah, and that was just an assumption of me. They're actually, from what I can tell, they were a really good facade installer, but still they had made that mistake to price out a wrong product.
So if they're very good installers, then they can, then the extra cost, I mean, that's what contingencies are for. They put in the better WRB, right? That it just needs to be built the way it's supposed to be built.
What was the RFP though? Like that's, to me, is the issue. Like you're going out and you're going to tender and you're having bids. Who's looking at the RFP after
Somebody
to look at
missed
the bid
it.
and see that it wasn't right?
Yeah, someone missed it. Yeah.
And I would say, you know, this kind of thing can happen even with really good builders because you don't know what you don't know. So if they think that one membrane is the same as another membrane or something, and they haven't been educated on that,
I'd say 95% of them don't understand that there's one membrane that's different than another.
Yeah. So it comes down to communication, I guess, and communication, you know, everything, like communication of the objectives and if you're doing something that's different than what's conventional, they clearly need to, like, there's this way I feel, when I'm talking to builders, I'm always kind of like trying not to scare them off if they're like, I really want this guy to do this passive house. And like, because if it's like somewhere in the middle of nowhere and there's like only 2 builders in that part of Nova Scotia, I've either got to work with the guy who's there, or I've got to, like, pay for somebody's gas to drive 2 hours, right? So, so like, I do find that I get into trouble with this too, because I'm like trying to be like, this isn't that different from what you're already doing, but here's where it's different. And if they just kind of go, oh yeah, I understand, and they think membrane is a membrane is a membrane, that's the problem.
It is. Yeah, I wonder about the first example, if the product that they normally use, if it was okay, if it was something that they could have used, and if that it was okay for them just to use the other product. And sometimes just having that conversation, and if they're not comfortable with using a different material, you work with what they are comfortable with. If it's possible to do, instead of forcing people to do things that they're not comfortable with, work with what it is that they are comfortable with, and work a way around it so that it works with the whole building. But that's why you involve them at the beginning, because if they're not comfortable with something, a foundation's type or style might change because the contractor's not willing to do it the way that one person wants to do it. And that's totally fine. They're the people who are guaranteeing their work. They're the people who are doing the work. So it may be that some compromises have to be made. Often those things don't actually affect the certification of the building. Like some of these things you can get hung up on that don't actually make that big of a difference, and you can work your way around it in terms of performance and in terms of building science as well.
There's a question in the chat that says, do manufacturers need to educate contractors more? And like, who's, is it the manufacturer's job? Like, it's, I mean,
well, that's what Hans and Sean are busy doing, right?
Yeah. Do you guys see that as your job?
Yeah, but like my business card says trainer on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. First and foremost, my job is to go out there and actually train. Well, it starts with the architect. I go and we do detail reviews and we look at specifics. We even do hydrothermal analysis if somebody questions what the specific things need to be. And then because the builder may actually be fearful of using something new, we go there and we just show them how it's done. And so my clear answer is yes. I do see quite a few other products out there that builders are just completely left with. And they're not necessarily bad products. The construction company just is missing a specific detail on it. And so they are now the guinea pig of trying that out themselves. And so, but we also have a different business model for that reason. So with most of the suppliers going through distributors, the message never goes directly from the manufacturer to the end user. And the reseller at the distributor, he doesn't really care whether or not you're installing it correctly or if the building has failures. He's just interested in the sales numbers out there. And so that makes us a bit different, but that's just to give you an idea of what Seaga's up against.
I'd like to say I agree with Kim that it really comes down to the integrated process in the beginning, because I think a lot of times people are rushing and a lot of the numbers and the details from the beginning aren't clearly communicated. The margins on the project aren't clearly communicated, and for that reason, when you don't have an open book process, a lot of those details get overlooked, because I think a lot of builders don't want to get stuck in a long process of communicating those details without actually securing the project ahead of time. And the only way to secure the project ahead of time and I guess go through all the communication necessary is to have an integrated process. And I'm really curious on what that integrated process looks like, because we don't do much in terms of integration from the beginning, but I've been a long time. I guess for a long time I've wanted to see what that type of a process would look like and how to make it fair for everybody and avoid awkward situations, and that everybody's on the same page right from the get-go.
Yeah, so my approach is that, first of all, you don't pick people who are the lowest bidder. I mean, that's just a no-go. You pick people that you know that you can work with. And then you let them know that they're going to get paid for their time while we plan this project. And so there's an agreement on how much you get paid, how many hours, we put a limit on hours, or we can look at a limit on hours, and just so that the owner has a better idea of what they're spending. And when you're approaching the limit, and reassess or assess, but everybody's paid. I mean, with an integrated project delivery, the idea is everybody's paid fairly. Nobody's making money hands over fist, because they guessed at the numbers and guessed well and make some money, so they can give you the least expensive products and making the most amount of money. I mean, these are the things that are wrong with construction business, or getting you to spend more money on stuff so that I can charge 12% on the product. Like that's not what we're trying to do. So there are some products that are more expensive, and you choose them wisely. You don't always have to use the most expensive product. That's something that you can come up with when you're coordinating and talking about things in the early days. That's the idea. But I think you bring on the team first. The owner is on board, and the owner puts and with some help with the PH consultant, or with the designer, or the architect, or maybe on their own, pulling together a team, and the team grows based on who knows who and who's worked with who in the past, so that you have a team that is comfortable with each other, and they're good with talking about stuff.
Yeah, is the paid for planning sort of separate from the cost of the project, or is it all together? And how much time is allowed for planning and paid planning?
That's a good question. And I guess it depends on the project. I mean, it depends on how big it is, how complex it is. We're talking about a house, I don't think it needs to be onerous, but as a designer, I like people to spend a lot of time thinking about their house when they're designing a house. When you're going to spend upwards of $1 million on a project, you probably should spend a bit of time thinking about it before you put shovels in the ground. And so many people are anxious to say, I've made this decision and we're going to go ahead. This is what I want it to look like. Get it built for me. I want it, as soon as you possibly can. And that approach just doesn't work. You really have to consider more aspects of a building if you're going to be happy with it and you're going to live in it and enjoy it for a long time.
I agree for sure.
Can I just jump in for a quick sec? I've really pushed a lot right now with checklists and making sure that what you were saying earlier about pre-ordering and getting everything, all your ducks in a row. And I'm finding it's not even on a PH. It's not even a high performance home. It was just a very simple reno. And I just had my documentation, and I actually have never done this before. I pushed to make sure that decisions were made immediately, that we ordered right away, that there was no stone unturned, that we went through the whole planning process, that everything was really covered off. I think if you have that methodology in this your regular day, when it comes to PH, then it just will roll itself right in. And I think, Bruce, that's the key is making sure that you have your system in place so you don't have any fall off. And that to me is really, really important. So, but getting back to this one thing that Hans was talking about, maybe that's where the tradesperson comes in when you're talking about this RFP. Maybe the tradesperson's involved with it, and it's them who is saying, we should get bids from company A, company B, and company C. And maybe they're reviewing the bid to make sure they say, oh, by the way, before this goes forward, you don't have all the specs, or having a detailed sheet of saying, here's what we want your bid to look like, which we've seen before. And maybe that makes it easier as well, which then goes back to my other point that I just made about making sure that we have standardization in your process.
So some software and software organizing programs like Buildertrend help you to do these kinds of things, that not really necessarily for just because it's PH, but any kind of building. That's what their thing is. That's what they do, and they do help to organize projects if that is helpful at all. And of course, for smaller projects, like I said, smaller projects tend to be like this anyways. They tend to do integrated project delivery, especially if you've made a decision about a builder, using a builder. That builder does this kind of work. That's how that builder has its good reputation, and they use trades that they trust, and they deliver projects on time and at a reasonable cost. Otherwise, they go out of business.
Yeah. I also think as far as the planning and organizing, there's a lot of smaller builders like myself that don't have a project planning process, and our company, like, we're only a few years old, and we've sort of passed the threshold of just trying to survive into okay, now we're at a certain point when we need to develop our business, and we've been investing in business development and training, and what I'm seeing is a lot of larger companies that work on larger projects, commercial or even multi-unit residential type buildings. Those larger builders have planning processes. They have those things set in place. Smaller builders, not so much. I think a lot of smaller builders are just blue collar guys that have no formal training or education in project planning, administration, proper administration, and these sorts of things. And we're just now touching the surface of what a good project plan and process should look like. And I feel like there's probably, like myself, many other smaller builders that are just undereducated when it comes to executing a good project plan. And most people, it comes down to the dollar and just being able to get the production and the money coming in. But at the end of the day, like you said, if you don't deliver a good project on time and on budget, you'll go out of business. And unfortunately, that's the case for many. But we're really working hard in our company to take those larger builder processes and apply them in a smaller company setting. And I think that's really going to be the key thing into having a successful project and a successful relationship with a client.
It's true. All that's true. Yes. And that the more organized you are, the less likely you are to go out of business, and the more likely they are to be happy.
For sure.
So there's a very good question here from Ian about my experience with electrical or plumbing tradespeople, because my experience is that they need to be, you need to talk to them repeatedly about what the job is, what's going on. A recent experience, the person who, it's a small project, and the person who owned the business really understood what we were after, what our goals were, what was going on. Then he sent his guys to the site. He didn't tell them about what our goals are, etc. So at the end of the day, one day, this is just an anecdotal situation. End of the day, one day, one of the tradespeople drilled a hole in the wall for a dryer vent that didn't exist and wasn't there. My client phoned me that day and said, "Why is there a hole in the wall?" And that was this is how things fall apart. It's just a small project. It was easily fixed, and he got roused about it. He got teased about it. And he had, from that point on, he was super careful, and he was asked questions all the time. But and it's key that it was the end of the day, because he wasn't even thinking, and he never thought to call and ask, whether there would be one, there should or shouldn't be one, and that would have been easy. So that's how things happen on PH projects, though. That's the kind of stuff that happens. And it's not, that wasn't really a mistake. It was just because the communication broke down, right? And mostly things can be repaired, but bringing them forward, if you think there's a breach or if you think that there's a problem, that's the key to making it successful, and keeping, not trying to cover it up or blame it on somebody else, just getting it fixed. That's the way to make it work. Yes, there was a condensing dryer in that site. Yes.
I've got a quick question. I was sort of the same mindset as Harvey, that that passive is more expensive to build, and not everybody has a PH budget. In regards to your note about a lot of PH homes or buildings coming in under or below standard cost, like we build ICF homes, and so, for example, your typical ICF home has 5 inches of foam, 2.5 inside, 2.5 outside, and I believe to pass the minimum standard for PH, I think you'd have to go up to like a Nudura XR35 block, which is more foam and more cost right off the top. So back to my first comment is I was of the same mindset as Harvey, where PH costs more to build. Is there sort of a what's the word I'm looking for? Any data that shows like a rough or even an accurate percentage of how much more it costs to go with the PH design and build? Like, could you say like, well, could you reasonably say PH costs, roughly 15-20% more to build? Obviously it depends on the project, but is it something that you can sort of get out of the way with a client right off the bat if they're interested in PH but may or may not have the budget, and you want to give them some indication or some idea of what the cost will be before you start getting into all the details and the homework for nothing?
So Bruce, this is all project specific again. It's about size and it's about the complexity of the project. So if it's a simple project and the owners are understanding that that's the goal, is to keep it simple, if they want to keep it under at budget or on budget, it will be the same as a code built house. It doesn't have to be a lot more. I think as in Nova Scotia anyways, Natalie's building them, Natalie Leonard's building buildings that are the same cost as code built houses in Nova Scotia. So that's single family and that's rare, but she has a system in place and she's doing it. For bigger buildings, multifamily buildings, there's a developer in Toronto that does affordable housing. So affordable housing really has, they all, in order to make it affordable, have low budgets. And they've delivered 3 low cost, low affordable housing units below what it would cost them to do, not passive house standards. So that's because they're eliminating things like steel. They're eliminating really concrete. They're minimizing concrete. So they're minimizing things that cost a lot. They're also becoming more and more low carbon. This is what happens when you have people who understand and know about what they do and how to save money doing what they do, because they might be working all day long saying, I don't know why this person's doing it this way, because this is costing them a whole lot more money. If they would do it this other way, they would save a lot of money. Those are the people we want at a meeting at the beginning to help us save money.
Right. Yeah, no, it's interesting because I mean, like I mentioned, we do ICF homes and we do a lot of custom homes that are not so simple and always fairly complicated. And it seems to me that the client would probably have to choose what's more important, a fancy custom design or a passive design that's better for everybody all the way around for the short term and the long term goals.
And they can have both. They just will pay more for it. That's really what it comes down to. And it's about 5 to 7% is is the number we
Mhm.
use if you want to get to passive house or build close to passive house building. And then if you want to make it net zero, then and add some PVs, then that's another 5 to 7%. So somewhere in the 10 to 15% range, we're getting to net zero for any building. Usually tops out about there.
That's a good indication. Okay, that's interesting. And then another 10 or 15 for ICF.
Well, yeah. So once you're using concrete, yeah, I mean, you there are people who clients that really prefer to have concrete buildings, and I had one that was pretty concerned about fire, and concrete was the way that they wanted to go. So there was no question. That's how they wanted to build. So there's ways of doing that.
It also depends. It also depends on the window, especially if there's a north window that they're overlooking the forest or the lake. I think, Lori, was that the one of your houses?
Oh yeah, we have a massive north window in one of our passive houses, and we still made it work. That one was definitely a house that cost more than conventional, but our projects, so we had it, our very first project that we did, we had an independent economic case study was done of our project, and it was in PEI, in rural PEI, and it was something like 18% more to build. But PEI is a very expensive place to build because everything has to cross the bridge. Like it's just like an extra tax on building supplies to go there. And then our second passive house cost exactly what every other house cost per square foot to build that year. And so when we did our second project for the cost of a conventional house in Nova Scotia, we were like, that's very stupid. We're never going to do another conventional house, because if we can do one the same price, then why would we bother? And so that was scary, but we did it. And we kind of haven't looked back, and I'm still paying my employees, so it's going okay.
I think the interesting thing is it's part of its components, and then part of it becomes your building code, right? So
Yeah.
if you're getting away with right now, I think things are going to move to a triple pane. Once that happens, the double pane's out, so it doesn't really matter at that point, because you're usually going to be at a triple pane for a PH. You can get away with a double pane for a conventional build. You can do it in Toronto here. You can do 1 inch on the outside, but as we know, for insulation, it can increase up to 6 to 8 inches on the outside. So you can start seeing that difference, but it all depends on how the building code starts to push towards the pH and a pH standard. So I think that's kind of the main thrust. And then the final two things I think are the cheap tieback is a lot. It's so easy to install and so cheap to put up compared to a Siga product. Not that that's a bad thing about Siga, but because it's a way better product. And then finally, it's just that everyone seems to think at the moment that the heating system is going to be a lot cheaper. And it's just not, because we don't have the components yet. Then you were even mentioning it already, Kim, that trying to find some of it is very difficult in North America, right? So I think for Bruce's question, it's really, it could be to 15, it could be like Lori says 18, so I think if you kept yourself and just use 20% at the moment, you probably would be pretty close to where it would be on the differential.
I think that's for net zero though, Harvey. You can do it
that
for
is for net zero here, because in Nova Scotia we have good solar incentives. So it doesn't actually, everyone who does a passive house with us goes to net zero, because why not?
Right. So, okay. So in Ontario, it's a little bit different, but I think what I was referring to on I'm referring to the heating systems, that a lot of the ones that you're really looking for, you can't find here. And so if you do find it, you may find a Zender, but that's the only one maybe that works.
These are all about trade-offs. So if you're wanting to if you're wanting to stay on budget, then it's very easy to do electric heat without something really fancy. Heat pumps start to cost some money, but even the sizing of the heat pumps can be modified. I mean, especially in Ontario. So there's just there's ways of picking and choosing. The clients have to be on board with it about what their expectations are. I mean, I've have clients that insist on having geothermal when it's just a $70,000 cost for really no reason at all, because they need such a small amount of energy to heat their home. But they want that's something focused on, and that's something they want. If they want to spend the money on it, then it makes the whole process seem like it's more expensive, but it doesn't have to be.
I do have one last question. I know I'm sorry if I'm hogging it. I mean, there's other people probably do, and I'll be quiet after this. But it's just, what about the domestic hot water tanks that seem to be coming out now, the high efficiency ones? And what are you seeing with those, and how are they impacting your builds and your designs?
Well, we're putting, at least in my projects, we're using heat pump hot water almost exclusively. It does cost more. Again, Nova Scotians get a good rebate for installing that in your house. So, I mean, I think, they're probably $2,500 to $3,000, whereas a regular one's like, $700 or $800. But I think we get it half price or something, so it makes sense. And the only difference I can find is, sometimes like we would put a conventional hot water tank in a fairly compact area, and you can't do that with a heat pump one. Like, it needs to have some breathing room. I mean, sometimes we put a grill on the door and keep our fingers crossed, but that's the challenge. But they're well worth it. Like, once your loads are in your heating loads are in the passive house realm, hot water is actually more expensive.
It's a good answer. Hot water is tricky.
Just curious about air sealing around and getting a nice tight seal around windows in an ICF build. What do you typically see, or what's the practice there?
Yeah, it's funny. I've done a couple of ICF houses, but I've not done an ICF passive house. So I don't know that I can speak to it other than
I would put a plywood buck, and then you over insulate the windows.
Yeah.
So I think I would keep it as standard as that. So not very much different than a double stud wall detail. That's how I would approach it, probably.
Okay. Yeah, we typically do a 2x12 window buck, and I've always thought that the space between the buck and the backside of the buck, where it meets the concrete and the palm, there's just that little gap there. And so is there a particular type of tape you would use to seal around that?
There's a lot of approaches, Bruce. There's a lot of ways of doing this one. So I think you need to consult with somebody about some of the ways that you might do this. This is a whole long conversation.
Sure. All right.
Yeah.
I was all have the answer to that for sure.
Yeah, there's good tape. Siga.
Yeah, it's either tapes or gaskets. That's really the two ways.
Gaskets,
to go.
yeah.
And then depending on whether it's inside and outside, you use different ones as well. But
I would use plywood for the back. By the way, I wouldn't use 2x material.
So I'm curious. We've had like a great four-way chat here. But there's definitely some folks who've been hanging on here. So I'd love to hear
if
from
there's any other
somebody
questions.
we haven't heard from.
I want to say I did post those links, and the links that I posted that I prepared for the presentation really have more to do with commercial buildings than residential, not really knowing. So there's an awful lot of other links for other products for residential, but this was really focused on fiberglass windows and fiberglass standoffs and things that sources for commercial buildings.
Hey, Ian here. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Not sure about this microphone. I just thought I'd take a moment to say hello to Kim. I don't know if you recognize the name. My wife and I spoke to you a long time ago about our own home. It's probably, I don't know, at least a year, maybe more ago. Okay. We've had some setbacks, so things are delayed, but still going to happen. Awesome. But meanwhile, things kind of flowing from those conversations. I'm actually taking the trade certification courses that are starting in a few days here with Passive House Canada. So
awesome.
It's been
In
fun
Vancouver,
learning.
it's in Vancouver, right?
This one's an online one, which
Oh, it is. Okay.
which suits
Okay.
me very well too.
Okay, great. Awesome.
So good to see you today. Thanks.
Yes, great. Anybody else have questions?
I don't have a question. My name is Manas. I just wanted to say hello and apologize that I arrived late. I'm with Rockwool. I'm also the chair of Bâtiment Passif Québec, so the Quebec Passive House Association. And I joined the conversation or the presentation to meet and see all the other passive house lovers out there. So Nova Scotia is part of my territory as a Rockwool person, but I like to connect with other people.
Awesome.
So hello everyone, and hello to Hans.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. And yes, it's okay that you joined late. Glad you made it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Kim or general? We've had we kind of did a deep dive on construction and builder related stuff, but we can come back to specifications for the last. We've just got about 10 minutes left. And
I always have thousands of questions. You know
that. One of the things, so it's interesting because we have lots of people on this call who are not in Nova Scotia. We're trying to decide if we're going to make the leap that that Vancouver did and have a meeting in real life soon. So I'm keen to know what folks think. You're all welcome to come have a beer with us here in Nova Scotia, no matter where you are, but it's probably more a question for the locals.
I think for me, I mean, as Hans was writing me in the chat, I haven't really been going to a lot of meetings recently. So this one, because Laurie, I've gotten to know you over the last few years, and Kim, I've seen a number of your presentations. So when I saw it today, I was really excited to be able to join. I think it's great to have that opportunity. Like I'd said to you, Laurie, about 6 months ago or so, and I said, when you do the retrofit, let me know, I'll come in. And then it just slipped my mind. And you said, yeah, we're framing now. And I'm like, oh my God, I better catch a flight. But so we could talk about that.
Over.
But yeah, that would be fabulous to come out, because the thing is, which is interesting, is every province has a little bit of a different way of looking at their build. And for me, if there's a best practice that is happening in Nova Scotia that would work well in Ontario, I'd love to know about it, right?
Yeah. Well, Harvey, you are welcome to come hang out on my retrofit site and bring your tools. And I am actually planning on sharing what we're up to at some point in a Passive House Pulse. It might be soon, it might be later, but yeah, and I think it's funny when a few months back I actually sat in on the new Passive House Canada Enerfit course, and every example building in there is in New York. There might be one from, I don't know, from Germany or something, but it's like we need Canadian content.
We really do. Yeah.
I'm gonna see. I mean, I'm you guys are gonna have to hold my feet to the fire. If I run out of money, I might not hit the targets, but we're gonna see how far my money goes. And we're, so far the energy model works. That's all I can say.
I'll say this much: I'm always interested in learning, and as much as I can. And if there is any functions going on locally, I would certainly be interested as long as time allows. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll add you to our list.
Great, thank you.
So it feels like we're kind of wrapping up here. I'd love to know. I just told you guys what I'm up to. Is anybody else working on anything cool before we close out the event?
For me, I can just say that I'm not involved in too many passive house projects because here in Quebec, somehow energy is so cheap. And so I go and talk and present and, get the message out there, and the presentation will end with a question like, yeah, but when energy is so cheap, why would you build like that? And that's so frustrating, because there was more than just the reduction of, energy consumption that I presented. But so that's the big challenge that we have, apart from the challenge, obviously, of getting your association away from being purely run by volunteers to the next level, where it's always like, how much effort do we need to put to get more visibility? And we would love to hire somebody part-time who could run the basics. So that's the Passive House challenges I have. There are a few projects coming up now, finally, but that's really, I'd say, the initiatives of a number of builders and architects that are really putting some efforts in there. But I find it very hard to get it off the ground in Quebec. I don't know, like to build badly, or I don't get it really, but yeah, so that's my big challenge.
Yeah, that is a tough one.
That's a challenge, I think, that we're seeing in Ontario, because it's the opposite here. Electrical prices are much more expensive than gas, although that's starting to even out at the moment. But that's going to be the key. Like, when you look at Manitoba, you look at Quebec, and you look at BC, they have such an easy route to go Passive House because of electrification, whereas in Ontario, it's a lot different. People look at it, they're indifferent, actually, because of they don't see the perceived savings, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think the focus around here for building better has more to do with independence than it does with energy savings, because gas is super cheap in Alberta still. But the idea that you can be independent and not, it's self-protection or self-preservation, that people were considering this kind of build.
Definitely is a big factor. I mean, in the winter, we had Hydro-Quebec basically asking their users to reduce their energy consumption when we were at -28 or something. And that obviously is the answer to why should we build better, apart from comfort and so on. And then the other factor for Quebec would be, we can export more energy if we don't use it ourselves. Because, that's a big market for Quebec, is exporting energy to the state of New York, for example. Which is, of course, a bigger picture, but yeah, then the whole culture of having your chalet, which can, be independent. So yeah, that's maybe the ways that we can get in there.
Yeah,
but definitely resiliency of buildings, not being so easily exposed to weather changes or extreme weathers. I think that's really a big plus for a passive house in our area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might be an upcoming topic. We recently pitched some kind of a talk to Halifax, which Halifax is actually pretty progressive and has very aggressive climate action plan. And they said, oh, they didn't understand whatsoever the link between passive house and resiliency. And I was like, no. So okay, I definitely need to work on that side of my messaging. So yeah.
Because that's not a clear path, Lori. It's not necessarily clear to anybody because good building science doesn't mean a thing to anybody when you say that.
No, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right, folks. Well, thank you all so much. This was a great chat. Thank you for your time, Kim. And I have to say this one, we didn't rely on Kelly at all, which was, Kelly, where are you?
She left.
Usually Kelly bails me out a couple times, so we did it.
Awesome.
Really appreciate everybody coming out. Thank you so much, Hans and Siga, for being our sponsor. And yeah, I think I should have looked before to let you guys know when the next one is. It's in about a month. So yeah, watch this space and keep doing good passive house work.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, folks.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Bye-bye. And Harvey, I'm going to call you.
Thanks so much.